Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for having me this morning, and it's really a pleasure, if not to have you all in front here, but at least to have three-dimensional faces and smiles and some human heat also. It's really nice, and I hope this is the first step for resuming completely to normal conferences as before. So. I've looked at the agenda of the conference, and of course it's extremely interesting, and it goes in, I think, a lot of, if not all of the critical aspects of wind energy. And this morning, the purpose of my presentation is certainly not to let's say, get you into any of the advances or details of wind energy that you certainly know better than I do, but more to give you a global perspective of where what EERA is doing, where we're heading to, and also how we see wind as a really critical element of the clean energy transition. And maybe before starting, I was, everybody is following the news, so you've seen certainly the issue between France, Europe, and let's say Australia, States, United States, and United Kingdom about the submarines deal. This is taking more and more, I would say, it's getting worse and worse in terms of crisis. Apparently, Europe will be cancelling or delaying the Trade and Technology Council, which was planned with the United States. So we see very clearly that we are, from a geopolitical perspective, entering into a new period. And that we probably cannot count, as we naively did in the past, on a very strong and, I would say, undisputable transatlantic connections and support. And so it's the reason why probably Europe speaks more and more about, strategic autonomy. And I think that what JP Wind is doing and what EERA is doing with the other JPs, developing technological leadership, will be a very significant part of the geopolitical debate in the future. If I look at energy, if we look at energy over the 150 years, last 150 years, I would say geopolitics were driven mainly by security of supply and access to fossil fuels. But we know that with the climate change crisis, things will change radically in the next 3-4 decades. And certainly the importance or the prevalence of fossil fuel will decrease. And what will become the name of the game is really industrial leadership on clean energy technologies. And this means technological leadership and also access to key resources. And that's, of course, one of the reasons why China is so generous with Africa at the moment. But it means that for Europe, we need to stand up, and that reinforcing our leadership in some of the key technologies will be absolutely crucial for our very existence on the global scene. EERA, you probably all know EERA. We have the origin of EERA is really catalyzing European research on low-carbon technologies. But we have, 2 years ago, we have revised our strategy, and we have changed our mission to link it not to an objective of being the best in climate in low carbon technologies, but rather to be supporting climate neutrality by 2050. And this is yes, sorry, I don't change. Yeah, and this is a very important change in our strategy, because it means that the objective is much wider. It's achieving a climate objective rather than being expert in a range of technologies. And the consequence of that is that we need to have a much broader understanding of what clean energy transition really means. And I will come to that later on. We believe in particular that to reach climate neutrality, it's of course about developing these key technologies, but more than that, it's to understand how these key technologies can be integrated and deployed at scale within society. And we believe that to reach climate neutrality, it will need a complete and pervasive transformation of our society. Everything that we do. In fact, we often forget that energy represents 75% of greenhouse gas emissions, but the energy sector only represents 1/3 of the global emissions, meaning that emissions are due to industry, to buildings, to transportation, and also to the changes in the land use. So if we want to reach net zero, it's not only looking at the power sector, it's looking at the whole human activities and how energy spreads around, across all the sectors and the human activities. So we need to have a wider perspective than just what we used to do, which is getting low carbon technologies to be deployed. You probably all know that EERA is a network, a European network of leading public research centers and universities. So we coordinate the activities across 250 organizations, research centers or universities, across 30 countries, and they represent approximately 50K energy experts. It doesn't mean, of course, that 50K energy experts work within EERA, but this is the potential of the network of EERA. And as such, definitely EERA is the most influential and largest energy community in Europe, and maybe perhaps worldwide. So the core of EERA is, of course, the joint research programs, and joint programs are permanent structures which enable collaboration of these different research organizations on joint research agendas. And what we're looking at is really to streamline and structure European research efforts in the field of the clean energy transition, and also, as much as possible, to leverage and align the national priorities to the European priorities. And we all know that this is a major challenge, but I think we're progressing quite significantly in that respect. And one way of measuring that is to see the impact that we have on the SET plan, that you all know, certainly the Strategic Energy Technology Plan, and more recently on the Clean Energy Transition Partnership, which is a new instrument under Horizon Europe Framework Program. On this one, EERA joint programs have been totally central to writing the strategic research agenda of the Clean Energy Transition Partnership. So I think we're gaining visibility and credibility within the European ecosystem, being with the Commission, but also with the member states. If we look at this, at this joint program, so we have 18 joint programs, and of course, SETWind is certainly one of, if not the most mature joint program, and we are very proud of the achievement of SETWind. Basically, we have programs on low carbon technologies. SETWind is one. We have 2 programs, we have 12 of those, so they cover all the low carbon technologies. And saying low carbon means renewable, but also technologies like nuclear and carbon capture. We have 2 which are working on specifically on materials, which are basically enabling technologies for low carbon energy technologies. And we have 4 programs which are really looking more at the system level. And this is a very important aspect because I think all in the room understand and connected understand that it's not only the question of having the technologies, we need to have these technologies working together efficiently and across the different sectors. So we're covering the whole range of issues to address the clean energy transition. After this short introduction, I would like maybe to elaborate a little bit on the key messages of Diederik Samson yesterday. And if you remember, on the EU Green Deal, he said, well, there are 3 discussion points for me. First of all, he spoke about the ambition of the program, the fact that for the first time it was an integrated policy package. And also he mentioned that this was meant to be a growth engine for Europe. So I would like to make a couple of comments on this, because I believe it's very important for joint programs to understand or to position ourselves within the global context of the EU Green Deal. And one of our ambitions is that for some of the joint programs, we'll be developing joint programs into European centers of excellence. So it's very important to understand the global context wherein we are bound to play a key role. So first of all, looking at ambition, I would like to say yes, 55% reduction in 10 years, zero emissions by 2050. These are words. Most of the countries or most of the big emitters have committed to that. But just to quote Fatih Birol of the Energy Agency, we need real reductions in the real world. And if we look at the real numbers, the IPCC has released a first part of the assessment report 6th. I mean, it's absolutely daunting what it says. It says, first of all, that we are bound to reach at least 1.6 degree warming probably before 2050, and the trajectory we're having is probably leading us to 3 to 4 degrees by the end of the century. If we look at emissions, we clearly see that, except for the COVID crisis, we are growing emissions year on year since World War II. There is absolutely no sign that we are curbing emissions. So nothing is happening in the real world except words and political commitments, which at the moment do have very little practical existence. I made a calculation that if we want to reach net zero in 30 years from now, we need to decrease emissions by approximately 7 to 8% year on year for the next 30 years. So if you make 7% decrease every year for 30 years, you reach almost zero. Now, just to give you an idea, 7% decrease in emissions is exactly what has happened last year because of the COVID crisis. So it means that it's a figure, of course, but it means that we need, for the next 30 years, every year, a disruption which would be equivalent to what has happened with the COVID crisis. No flights anymore, factories closed, nobody moving, no transportation, everybody on lockdown. So this is just to figure out what is the size of the challenge we have ahead of us, and nothing is happening. And I think most people lack completely the sense of urgency. If we look at the energy mix, I've checked just before this conference, the latest figures we have are 2019, so 2 years old. We tend to say, well, clean energy technologies are really being deployed at high speed, and so we're getting to it. If you look at the global energy mix worldwide, wind energy, you look at the primary energy demand, wind energy represents less than 3%, and solar energy represents less than 1.5%. And the bulk is exactly as it was 50 years ago. It's coal, oil, and gas. You have a little bit of hydro, very little bit of hydro, and a little bit of nuclear. So, if you look at the macroscopic level, but this is what counts for climate change, you don't see it. I mean, what is happening with our low-carbon technology is, at the moment, still marginal. So we need probably to accelerate the rate of deployment by a factor 10 compared to what it happens today. And this is what we need to bring as evidence to the Commission. And in order to do that, we need to have much stronger investment in research and innovation, because we know there's still a lot of improvement to do in many respects, even on mature technologies such as wind. And we need, of course, massive investment in these technologies for the deployment. The second point he mentioned was integration. He said it's an integrated policy package which looks at all the aspects in an integrated manner. There, of course, we could discuss for days because it's a very interesting subject, but I would like to point out 4 aspects that we need to keep in mind. The first one is, of course, energy systems integration. I think everybody understands, and JP Wind is very advanced in understanding how wind energy should be integrated within the power networks, and increasingly also with other energy vectors, talking about production of green hydrogen, maybe on offshore platforms and these kind of things. So I think we are very well advanced on this. There is a question of societal transformation, and as I said, if we want to reach zero emissions, it's about changing every aspect of the society. So it's how we consume, how we produce, how we use energy, how we heat ourselves, how we house ourselves, what we eat. So it's everything. And in that respect, I think it's very important that all the JPs have in mind the fact that the power sector, or even the energy sector, is only part of the global puzzle, but we need to understand it from a holistic and systemic manner. The third one is, of course, about Europe and the world. Europe, in fact, represents today, I think, less than 9% of global emissions. So even if we're excellent in achieving net zero, I mean, it's a prisoner's dilemma. It's very difficult. We are the first mover. We will be, this will probably act as a burden on our economy, except if we have these carbon adjustment taxes. But if the rest of the world is not moving, I mean, there's absolutely no point in doing it. So it's very important that this effort that we're doing is integrated within a global political effort for the other big emitters to follow the same trajectory. And finally, and I think this is particularly interesting for wind, climate is only, well, it has been the main driver over the last years, but we see that there are many other crises which are connected, and one of it is biodiversity. And we all know that there are more and more discussions on the pros and the cons, the positive effects and negative effects of having offshore wind farms on the biodiversity. This is also true for many of the other low-carbon technologies. And the question of resources. And as I said, if we want to scale up low-carbon technology, be it solar, be it wind, be it other ones, at the scale we need to reach zero emissions, the natural resource, mineral resources we need to achieve that are gigantic. And this causes major issues in terms of the sustainability of the whole cycle, but also in terms of access to these resources. And again, this is why there is so much tension with China at the moment. And finally, it's about growth engine. Diederik Samson was very clear on that. It's about growth. Personally, but this is, of course, only my analysis of it, I would quite challenge this one. And I would like first to quote Sir David Attenborough, who said, "Our environment is the planet, it's finite. And anyone who thinks you can have infinite growth in a finite world is either a madman or an economist." And I think it's very simple to understand. I mean, we just cannot continue to grow. Even if you integrate concepts of circularity, efficiency, and so on, we all know the principle of thermodynamics. We all know that circularity is only partial. We all know that decoupling between economic growth and emissions can only be partial. So there's no way out. You cannot continue to grow with the same economic indicators as we have. So it's probably about thinking of a different growth model. It's not necessarily going to degrowth, but thinking about other indicators and another growth model. And the final point, I think, is extremely important, because in the debate, we always speak about the competitiveness of wind, of solar, of hydro, of other technologies. But I think at some point in time, we must figure out that it's a question of survival for mankind on Earth. So what is competitiveness? I mean, if we are not able to live anymore on this Earth, I mean, what is the notion of competitiveness? And we all know, by the way, that the way competitiveness is defined is totally artificial. It can be redefined. And for instance, I remember very well with wind and solar 10 years ago, we were speaking about grid parity, for instance. This is a concept which has absolutely no meaning, because we know that in a system there are other elements which are not taken into account. Storage, for instance, the time, the availability is usually not counted as a service, it's not measured. The externalities are not measured, so competitiveness is something that we need to challenge. At some point in time, we need very strong regulation to impose some measures to move on according to the rate of deployment which is needed to achieve net zero. Having said that, I would like to just introduce what I believe is something which encapsulates quite well what we do in collaboration and I would say in complement to the work of the joint programs. We have started a year and a half ago in the context of the Clean Energy Transition Partnership. We have started writing a white paper about the clean energy transition. This white paper is in a final draft mode. It's being peer-reviewed at the moment by IEA. It has been peer-reviewed by EERA and by another policy institute, the Jacques Delors Institute. And it will be released formally on the 20th of October in a very high-level conference that we're organizing, a hybrid conference that will be organized in Brussels. I think this paper is very interesting because it will really connect what is being done in all the JPs within a more conceptual framework on what is needed to drive the clean energy transition. And in particular, what I think are key words there is, first of all, to have a holistic approach. As I said, looking not only at power, but energy, so power and heat, but also at all the way energy is used within society. So not only the power system or the energy system. Then it's the systemic nature of the transition. It means that very often, or until now, we've been looking very much into our own sector. So, you know, clean technologies generating electricity are looking into the power sector, full stop. They're not looking at how, you know, you can optimize this production of energy across the energy system. And for instance, what has been mentioned, you know, using excess offshore wind at peak time for producing green hydrogen could, I don't say this is the solution, but could certainly be one of the way for driving the transition. And this is really coupling the different sectors between themselves. So you need to have a system approach to drive the transition to net zero. It's cross-sectoral, as I said. We all know already the very strong link that we have between the energy sector and the transport, and this is becoming more and more evident with the electrification. But not only, for instance, with agriculture, with fertilizers and the production of hydrogen and ammonia, there are a lot of cross-sectoral opportunities to leverage. And finally, it's interdisciplinary in the sense that we all know that if we want these clean technologies to be deployed at the scale which is needed, it will need a total paradigm shift in the way people live in society. And so it's not anymore about the acceptance of wind farms here and there. It's about the fact that the citizens need to really embrace, endorse, and even appropriate the clean energy transition. So they need to push for it, not just accept it, they need to push for it. They need to understand that this is the way out for a better and more sustainable world. And in that respect, we believe that what is absolutely essential is to have a narrative on the clean energy transition. At the moment, more and more people see what we're trying to push as being constraints. They see, you know, windmills being, you know, a burden in their backyard. They see the same for solar energy, and for all others, they see more the changes in their habits rather than the positive thing that it can bring. So people need to really be able to project themselves into a global transition and relate how this will translate for them into a better end situation. And I think this is really missing, and we need to transform this idea of citizen acceptance to more the fact that we need the push by the population. And just to give an example of what this could bring, if you look at France, there has been a citizen debate council on climate change, and they made, I don't remember, 250 proposals to the government. Of course, we know in France everything is very difficult, but there were some which were already adopted. And for instance, one thing which was totally unthinkable 3 years ago will happen, I think, next year. For instance, in France, they will just or forbid any internal flight, domestic flight, which can be replaced by a train travel of less than 5 hours. So this is really an example of, a regulation which is imposing something which cannot be done by market, because we know that with the current market design, trains are more expensive than planes for very bad reasons, because of course the intrinsic cost is higher for planes, but on the market this is not the case. So we need very strong regulation, and this is really the reason why we should be very bold in what we expect from policymakers and politicians. So the key recommendation that comes out of this paper is, first of all, this notion of transition narrative, and this is something that EERA we will start working on with all of the joint programs, to really build this storyline on how we can achieve climate neutrality while not altering and even, if possible, improving the quality of life. It's something that we need to be very strong on, is we need to really scale up investment in research and innovation. And it's not about 10% or 15% more, it's probably about tripling or quintupling what is being spent in research and innovation. And just to give you an idea, the public authorities always say, well, we don't have money, we don't have money. Just to give you an idea, between 2008 and 2010, the European Commission has released directly to banks the equivalent of 140 billion euros. And the world spending, public spending in research and innovation for low-carbon technology is around 20 billion euros. So it means that the financial crisis, just what Europe has released as money directly to banks, was equivalent to 70 years of research and innovation of public spending. I'm not talking about private. So it gives you simply the fact that there is not at all the sense of urgency, and the money is not assigned to where it should be at the moment. So we should be very, very clear on the fact that the level of investment today is totally under what could bring us to a net zero in 2050, and this is certainly one of the battle that EERA will be undertaking. As I said, the dominance of the current economic paradigm, I think not everything can be translated into competitiveness and into comparative prices. I think we all know that. A lot of aspects cannot be priced simply because we don't know how to integrate them into a price. And market is failing in many respects. We have evidences of that all over the places. So we need more regulation and more strong policies. And then the last one is, of course, difficult because, as I said in the beginning of the introduction, we are getting back to some kind of geopolitics of blocks. There is more and more competition, and clearly, I mean, China is not anymore a partner, it's clearly a competitor. It's unclear what will be the relationship with the United States. But on the other hand, we know, and this was a very clear statement of the International Energy Agency, that if we ever want to reach net zero by 2050, we need to scale up also dramatically the level of international collaboration. So we need to collaborate more, but it would probably be more co-petition than collaboration, meaning that we need to be extremely prudent on keeping our intellectual property for ourselves and protecting our industrial leadership. So this was, in essence, the key messages I wanted to bring, which gives you maybe a perspective on where the joint programs are collectively heading to. And I certainly invite you to register to this high-level policy event that we're organizing on the 20th of October in the morning. It will be a hybrid event. We'll have an intervention, we hope, but it's not confirmed, of a high representative from the EU Green Deal, maybe Diederik Samson. We have already a vice president of the IPCC, which will introduce also the debate and put in perspective where do we stand and what needs to be done. And then we'll have high-level officials from the Commission discussing on two subjects. The first one will be this narrative, how to build a clean energy transition narrative for European citizens. And the second part of the panel, where, by the way, Peter will represent SETWind, will be dedicated to discussing with DG RTD and DG Energy on how to build European centers of excellence. So scale up basically the impact of our joint programs with additional leverage from member states and European Commission. So with this, I will stop here, and we'll be happy to take any question you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Adel, for this inspiring, but also my anxiety rose during the speech because you really make clear that we have a huge challenge to cover. And I think that, as SETWind, we fully support that feeling, of course, of the feeling in the sense that we want to do something about it and see our efforts in reality. And we do not have that much time. We have a question online about the CETP, so maybe a short answer. So it's from Stefan Baart. Adel, when do you think that the CETP really will take off and become a self-sustained R&D funding scheme? So,
well, the answer is I don't know because the Commission doesn't know. But the hint we had, Ivan, if I remember, was that it would probably not start before end of 2022, right? Was it last quarter 2022 was what was an indication we've got from the Commission, but it was totally informal. So there's really no official date yet.
Yeah, okay. And for the listeners at home, let's say, Ivan, without the microphone, stated that indeed not expected before 2022. Okay. We have a question from Antonio. So if the
time for questions?
Yes.
Lucky because I'm here on the first row. Mr. Gammal, thank you very much for your presentation. For me, it has been very, very inspiring, as you were saying. And also, I grew the anxiety about all the things that you were saying here, because I've been completely shaken. It's like at the beginning, you have like 7 questions. I guess I'm not going to be able to go through all of them, but that's what I mean, that really you inspire me with this talk. So thank you. But there was things that I was very surprised when you said, for example, that the emissions keeps on growing, and we didn't even try to bend. Well, we are trying, but we didn't even really bend the curve. So should we think that, for example, all the wind power that we are installing, we are substituting for non-emission sources, energy sources? I hope not.
No, the point is the global energy demand is growing faster than the rate of deployment. Okay,
so I want to believe in the shiniest part of the story that at least wind power is collaborating for not making the shape even steeper.
Yes. Of course, yes, absolutely. No point about that. Of course, no. The solution is, of course, to get. That's why I said we need to increase the rate of deployment tenfold, probably. Okay. We need to get from 2.2% in the global energy mix to, I don't know, depending on scenario, 30, 40%. So it's a total different game.
And 2 last remarks. Again, I want to get motivated after this talk. So when you say that Europe is only 9% of the global emission share, I want to say, okay, yeah, but we are trying to lead and we are trying to do the best. And we hope like we are the father figure.
Exactly.
We are the reference. So probably we do the best and we show the rest of the world how we can, let's say, survive or have a balance in our economy and everything by doing all these renewables. I guess this is the nice part of the story, no?
It's a nice part of the story, absolutely. By no means I wanted to say that this is useless to do it. We need, I mean, I'm sorry if there was maybe this confusion. No, I think it's essential that we keep, the climate leadership, which we have always had since the beginning. What I'm saying is that it's essential that we do not that in isolation, and that we do that in a concerted manner with other big emitters, and we know them, as China, United States, but also, and maybe that's also an important point, if you look at the projections, the biggest growth in energy demand will come from Sunbelt countries, mainly Africa, but not only. And these are countries where, at the moment, the consumption is quite limited compared to ours, but it will be skyrocketing because the population is growing and these living standards are growing. So it's essential also that there we are there to leapfrog the investment in the traditional technologies. Otherwise, they will be locked down. They will be locked for another 40 years with their fossil fuel assets. So there's really a major opportunity, need and opportunity for Europe to be present, in particular in Africa, but not only, to make sure that they go immediately to this next step of low-carbon technology, the same way they did with mobile telephony. They didn't have landlines telephony, and they switched immediately to mobile telephony. We need to do the same with energy infrastructure.
Yeah. Okay. Very, very, very short. And the last thing, 2 years ago, I read a book, Business Ethic, that was saying, and he was saying, don't claim on companies, private companies, and politician parties. And I was saying, they are alive entities. So they grow, they born, they grow, and they want to get multiplied, and you cannot stop that. So we cannot trust nor on the companies or politician parties that they will do something for stopping this. It's us, the society, who has to do that, who has to push for that.
Absolutely.
It's not mine, it's from the book.
I fully agree with you, certainly.
Okay, thank you, Antonio. If the microphone can go to Ignacio, then I'll first address a question that is online from Lena. Lena says, thank you, very interesting holistic perspectives on the energy transition and the increasing role of society. And then the question is, can you elaborate more on the new economic paradigm that you mentioned? And that fits very well with what came to my mind. So this different growth model, different paradigm, so what as SETWind can we do with that? And I think that the answer to the question is going to be very long. So I would propose to organize a workshop on that.
That's a very good idea.
Because we really would, it would be good to address that. And I think that Lena also has a lot of things to say about that from her perspective. So I will close that question short, and I will give the floor to Ignacio for another question.
Yeah, Ignacio Martí from DTU Wind Energy. Adel, thanks a lot again for an inspiring presentation. A few remarks here. We see, from our perspective, also coming back to this protectionism, competition versus collaboration and internationally. Unfortunately, I would say, we see a change of trend in major industry players towards more protectionism. They were already, let's say, quite protectionist, but even more. It is moving. It is the sense of competition is growing. So Asia,
you mean in Europe?
In Europe.
Yeah.
Europe, Asia, especially it's Europe, Asia at the moment, right? So we see that. This is a trend I think we all need to be aware politically, but it's also happening already in economy, in business, every day, right? So it is also influencing the way we are interacting with them and the level of protection that they want to be in place, information sharing, etc. So this is a trend there. Another point, it is, what I see it is, of course, some sort of political messaging, what you say. It is kind of, but where do you position, or where does the Research Alliance position? Because there are many stakeholders. We have EERA, we have IEA, we have others there, right? So what is the key focus for the Research Alliance? I understand the focus is on research, but I would like to hear it from you as well. Why another voice? Where is our voice compared to other voices? And then finally, is a very topic on the importance of national funding. How do you interact with national governments? Because most of the R&D public spending is coming from governments. Yes. It's not the European Commission. So, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So we'll answer to, maybe the first one was a comment, the two others are questions. So the second point was about where do we position ourselves considering the other actors, EERA, IEA, and the others. It's a very good question. I would answer in 2 points. The first one is, in the strategic task force, we have launched a strategic working group. And by the way, if you are interested, please contact me because this is an open effort. And we have different task forces looking at different aspects. One of the 3 task forces we have today is looking in particular on what should be the positioning of EERA on the international landscape. So the first thing we are sure about is that we would like to increase the cooperation with IEA and with IRENA. And the first steps in doing that is the fact that both IRENA and IEA have accepted to peer review the white paper. So they have made very valid comments that we're integrating, and we have initiated some kind of discussion with the key persons there. In IEA, it's mainly Mechtil Worsdorfer, who was at the Commission, director at the DGNR. And at IRENA, we're talking to Dolph Gielen, who is heading the Innovation and Technology Center in Bonn. So we are increasing the relationships. But in terms of positioning, I would say, well, we are certainly more focusing on the technological research. Where we probably start to overlap is looking at, how to drive the clean energy transition. What are the scenarios that we need to bring in order to achieve to net zero? I would say very clearly, if you look at IEA, of course, they have a firepower which is much bigger than ourselves. It would be, how could I say, we cannot compare ourselves to IEA, but they're looking much more into, I would say, quantitative scenarios, whereas in the white paper you will read, it's more a conceptual framework on how to approach the transition. And to give a final answer to this point, I think our role is to be really the trusted scientific advisor of the European Commission. I think we need to play a role internationally. We're trying to enter into mission innovation. We are already through the joint program, but we would like to have also a statutory role through the Commission, which is sharing mission innovation phase 2. So we will try to have more international impact through mission innovation, through collaboration with major agencies, and we're starting to think about what could be a potential for EERA in Africa, because of the ties we have with Africa. So that was for a second point. The third point you mentioned was, national funding. It's a very important aspect because, as you mentioned, most of the public research funding comes from member states. In fact, EU funding represents between 5 and 7% of the public spending in Europe. So the reason why EERA was founded 12 years ago was precisely to align national funding. Let's be totally honest, as Peter Hoge would say, brutally honest with the situation. This doesn't happen really. And I think the financial crisis of 2008, 2011 has created a lot of, how could I say, countries returning back to more, protectionist attitude towards sharing at European level. We need to push hard to get back to a situation where there's more transparency. And one way, we've tried for many years approaching this issue through the SETPlan steering group. The SETPlan has a governing body where each country is member state and associate country is represented. But we realized that it was very difficult because there's such a diversity of interest and strategies between the countries that in a global committee like this, you cannot approach any one of them. So we are, this is also part of the Task Force 3 of our strategy working group. We're thinking now about starting with the key countries, and we know who they are, try to make some kind of, I would say, country, a dedicated task force country by country, which would be led by the ExCo, the executive committee member of that country, and prominent members from joint programs in the technologies which are strategic for this country. And the idea would be then to meet individually the ministries and the decision makers in these countries on specific aspects which are part of the national strategies and national energy and climate plans. So it would be a much more dedicated approach. This is what we are thinking at the moment, but it's not yet implemented. It's in discussion. And you're right, this is absolutely critical. And if we would be able to have more impact in leveraging this national funding, I think this would give us a major positioning in the EU landscape.
Okay, and with that, I want to close the session, but not after we really thank Adel for this very inspiring talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.